everybody, and thank you, Jenifer, for that introduction. I'm also Jenifer Blouin Policelli. I am the Curator of Education at the Elkhart County Historical Museum. Thank you so much for having me out to talk to you about baseball history in Elkhart County today. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have been to a baseball game already this season? Okay, I'm seeing a couple hands, my goal is to inspire you to get out to the ball field at least once this summer, so hopefully we'll accomplish that with this talk. So, baseball in Elkhart County. It's been played here at every level from T-ball on up to the major leagues for more than a century. And so given that, there's no way that I can know everything about it, let alone cover it in 1.5 hour talk. I'll do my best, but I am going to miss a few things. But that being said, if you do have some questions, please save them for the end of the talk. I believe there should be time. Okay, yeah, there will be some time for Q&A at the end if you have some questions you'd like to ask me. So if you're a baseball fan, then you'll know that baseball provides a path for people to find community, power, and entertainment. And that's true of baseball in Elkhart County's history as well. But while it has brought Elkhart County residents together for more than a century, it has also highlighted inequalities within our community. And one of the areas where this is apparent is within local factory teams that began in the early 20th century. So these factory teams were made up primarily of laborers, and they fostered community and corporate spirit within those companies, while also shoring up economic stability for their employers. So one of the things that I find most intriguing about these factory teams is that they're made up of people who are working together in the factory all day, and then they choose by their own volition to, with their coworkers, take the ball field at night. So the people who played on these factory teams, they spent a ton of time together, both in and outside of work. I think I'm safe in saying this here because I'm outside of my own museum setting, but I don't know that I would want to play on a baseball team with my colleagues after spending all day with them. Don't tell my boss I said that. But no, these guys, they formed really tight bonds. And I know that businesses today will still put together baseball teams like this to help foster camaraderie and a community spirit among their workforce. But this trend, it started back in the late 19th century and into the first half of the 20th. And these types of teams were so ubiquitous across the country. They weren't just here in Elkhart County. And there were a few different factors that played into that. First, industrialization and urbanization were accelerating across the country. And so companies fielded baseball teams like this as a way to boost employee morale and to engender loyalty to their companies. Also, labor movements were really picking up steam around this time, and those advocated for better working conditions and more benefits for workers. So company-sponsored recreation was in part a response to that. Furthermore, a lot of these factories, they were fielding teams that were made up of very skilled laborers. They had a specific skill set that was not very easily replaceable. So it really was in the company's best interest to keep those workers happy. So Elkhart City is famous for manufacturing a few different types of products. I see some examples over there in that case. But who can name what is one product that Elkhart County, just above and beyond everything else, is famous for producing? Band instruments, bingo. Alka-Seltzer, yes. Band instruments is the one I was looking for, but yeah, we've got really good example of Alka-Seltzer, Miles Labs over there too. But each band instrument company had its own baseball team. Here we see Martin's baseball team around 1910. Boucher Band Instrument Company also had a team. Here they are around 1920. And of course, Kahn had a baseball team as well. Here they are around 1915. And so Con was the giant at the center of the band instrument world, and that was reflected in their presence in the Elkhart baseball scene as well. Here is a photo where you can see just a little bit of the Con baseball field down here in the foreground. This is the best picture that I could find of the field from our collections, but you do see a little bit of it there. And so this definitely has some like community sandlot ballpark vibes, but also this field was home to several MLB exhibition games, barnstorming games, including from Negro League teams like the Kansas City Monarchs and the Birmingham Black Barons. So this was a place where not just Con employees bonded, but it was a place where the community came together and people fell under baseball's spell as the stadium lights came on. One instance of this occurred when none other than Babe Ruth himself paid a visit to Con Field in 1940, June of 1940. And at this point, Babe was about 5 years past his retirement. He was seeing some decline in his health, but it was still a huge deal for him to come and visit Elkhart. At the time of Babe Ruth's visit, Elkhart resident Bill Heinheis was 12 years old. And remembering that occasion, he said, "You could see Con Field from my second floor bedroom window. And when the lights were on, it wasn't hard to talk Mom and Dad into going to the park. I spent a lot of time there watching baseball and softball." So that night, Bill got the chance to talk to Ruth. He got a couple of different signatures from him on a couple of different baseballs. And while Bill did not grow up to become a major leaguer, this interaction with Babe Ruth that happened at Con Field that night helped him develop a lifelong passion for the game that he then later passed on to his children. And that's the magic of baseball, right? That it can unite people of different ages and across generations. Now, during the same era that these factory teams were playing on the different fields around the city, there were also local semi-pro and citywide recreation leagues that were also fielding teams. And while these teams offered really awesome opportunities for some, for others they reinforced inequalities that already existed. So these teams, these recreational and semi-pro teams, they just proliferated around the start of the 20th century. There really are just like too many to name. How many of you have seen any of like the CSI type shows on television or are familiar with those types of shows? Okay, so a few of you are familiar. If you're not, these CSI shows, these like crime solving shows, there are so many different iterations of them. There are so many different spin-offs, and the characters are always bouncing from one show to the next and doing crossover episodes, and they get canceled and then rebooted, and it's a lot to keep track of. Well, these city recreational and semi-pro teams are the same way. It's really hard for a historian to track down all of these teams and keep track of the different players because they would bounce around from team to team. And sometimes the teams would dissolve and then reform years later. And so it becomes kind of a tricky web to try to navigate. And one other important thing to note about these teams is that especially in the first few decades of the 20th century, they were segregated. So the white teams here in Elkhart County, they started with one team called the Elkhart Truths. That should be a familiar name because of the newspaper, of course. And that was one of the earliest teams that started somewhere in the second half of the 19th century. Later, we get the Elkhart Blue Sox. We also have the Elkhart Eagles, the Elkhart Orioles, the Elkhart Grays, the Goshen Grays, the Napanee Tigers, the Jimtown Tigers. So you get the idea here. Those are just a few examples of the many, many teams that took the field during this time. And those teams gave opportunities for recreation, for the development of sportsmanship, and even career opportunities. And that was indeed the case for Lou Krieger, who was the first Major League Baseball first Major League Baseball player from Elkhart County. He began his career as a pitcher, but then he shifted over to being a catcher. And this began with him playing sandlot ball with a team called the Elkhart Lakeviews, and then also with the Elkhart Truths. Here's a photo of Krieger in his Elkhart Truths uniform. And Lou Krieger's continued rise was like every young baseball player's dream. He spent a couple of years playing minor league ball in Kalamazoo and Fort Wayne, and then he went on to the majors and played with Cleveland, St. Louis, and Boston. There he is there. He even got to play with some of the all-time greats, including Cy Young. And in fact, Lou Krieger was the catcher for Cy Young's perfect game in 1904. Caught every single ball of that game. And additionally, Krieger also caught every inning of every game in Boston's 1903 World Series championship title. But the roots of Krieger's success were right here in Elkhart County city recreational teams. However, while Lou Krieger was having all of this success within the major leagues, Black baseball players here in Elkhart County were having their own unique experiences, including facing a unique set of challenges that white players would not have had to worry about. So for context, in the early 20th century, the Great Migration is happening in America. Millions of Black folks are moving to northern cities looking for jobs and hoping to escape the Jim Crow South. At the same time, this post-World War I era was the height of the KKK's influence in Indiana. And this peaked, of course, in 1924 with the election of Edward Jackson to the governor's office. So consequently, there was not equal access for Black folks to jobs or recreation because of this discrimination that was happening from the top down. And those baseball teams were both. They were a source of income, a job, and they were recreational opportunities. This meant that for some Black ball players, the only opportunity they might have to play for a team was with one that relied on minstrelsy to draw crowds. Here's an example of what that might have looked like. So I'm going to show you a video in just a minute here. And this is a recording from a Black baseball minstrel type team called the Indianapolis Clowns, who in fact paid a visit to Conn Field at one time. This video was not from Conn Field, but they were here at one point. So I want you to pay attention to the players here, and I'm going to ask you about your observations once this video is over. If the video had been working, you would have seen these guys joking around with the ball. They were tossing it behind their back and catching it underneath their legs, and they were pretending to drop it but really catching it. They were goofing off, putting on a show, and also at the same time demonstrating some really, really excellent ball handling skills. So one of the things you would have noticed was the very exaggerated comedy of what they're doing. They are taking on these caricature-like roles and leading hard into racial stereotypes in order to sell tickets. And at the same time, we appreciate the skills that the ball players had. They were, you didn't see the video obviously, but they are clearly very skilled ball handlers. I know that if I had to turn a quick double play, I would have wanted one of them on my team for sure. So they have those excellent theatrical and performance skills as well. which really isn't a combo that we see a lot of, right? We normally have, the jocks over here who kind of stick to themselves. We have the theater kids over here who kind of, stick with their own crowd. But these guys, they were the full package. They managed to blend together those athletic skills with theatrical and performance skills. But unfortunately, because of the segregation and discrimination, their talents were often not recognized beyond these barnstorming minstrel type teams. And in fact, one of the first black teams in Elkhart County was this type of minstrel team. I'm going to give you a little warning here. You are about to see a racial slur up on the screen. So this baseball clipping is from the Middlebury Independent from July of 1919. You can go ahead and read the whole article. I'm going to just read some of the quotes from it here. So this clipping describes the players on this team as some of the best colored ball players in the state of Indiana. But added to and a part of their ball team is the uncorked comedy they cut loose at all stages of the game. Folks, if you want to laugh and be entertained, don't forget to see these black devils in action. They are full of pep, comical stunts, and funny sayings. So I don't know how long this team existed. That's going to require some more research. They were not very easily findable within the historical record. But I do know that starting in 1930, the first traveling black team from Elkhart County that played just straight baseball with no theatrical element was established. And they were known as the Elkhart Giants. They existed from 1930 to 1933, and they traveled throughout Michiana. They played local white teams and also regional power teams like House of David from Benton Harbor. Here's a picture of the Giants. And the Giants were known for playing really good baseball. They had winning records from all of the years that they existed. However, they only lasted a handful of years, and if you caught those years at the beginning, 1930 to 1933, that should give you a clue as to what happened to them. This was during the Great Depression, and there just wasn't as much funding or interest in recreational pursuits during this time because there were other things going on that people had to worry about during the Depression, of course. However, there were other teams that were established after the Giants folded that filled in the gap left by them. One of those teams was called the Blue Sox, and it was organized by a couple of brothers who had played for the Giants. Their names were Clint and Otis Stamper. And the Blue Sox were a younger team. They were not as well experienced as the Giants. And according to their shortstop and center fielder named Talmer Curry, they were strictly a sandlot team. And they toured throughout the region playing games. And despite all of the fun that they were having as, young, rambunctious kids, just excited to go out there and play the game, they experienced some things that made them uncomfortable. When they traveled to Shipshewana, for instance, this often drew an Amish audience, and many of those people had never seen a black person before. And they would approach the Blue Sox players and touch their skin, touch their hair, invade their personal space. Also, if they won a game against a white home team, they were often asked to not return to that field. And slurs were shouted at them from the stands quite often in those kind of situations. So it definitely was not always easy to be a black ball player. And it wasn't always easy to be black in general. For those of you who know your Elkhart history, you'll be familiar with the clearance of the Benham West neighborhood, a primarily black neighborhood that was demolished for urban renewal. And the Stamper brothers, Clint and Otis, and Talmer Curry, all three of them were residents of Benham West and had to move when that neighborhood was destroyed because their homes were demolished during that process. On a lighter note, it wasn't just the adults who got to have a lot of fun playing baseball here in Elkhart County. Kids and teens got to have their moment too. So the Booker T. Washington Center here in Elkhart offered this opportunity for Black youth. And so this is another moment where the joy of baseball really shines through. So imagine you're one of these kids up here on the screen, and you live in a neighborhood where on the 4 or 5 streets that surround yours, the rest of your teammates are all living there, and you're all best friends. You go to the same school, the same church, you're even delivered by the same doctor when you were born, and you get to play on the same ball team. You're just a very, very tight-knit community. And so think about what that feeling of camaraderie would have been like. And with players as tight as these guys were, it's no wonder that these Booker T. Washington teams were often winning their division and league championships. So yeah, another example of baseball offering a path to find community and entertainment and strength within your community. One group that we haven't talked about yet about Elkhart County's baseball history is women. Now, women's sports are really having a moment right now. We've got figures like Caitlin Clark in the basketball world, and we have Ilana Marr in women's rugby, who are really making a splash and bringing attention to female athletes. And they're drawing huge crowds. And similarly, around the World War II era, baseball fans rallied around the players of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. The AAGPBL, I always struggle to get that one right, there's a lot of letters. It was established, and the first games were played in 1943, right in the middle of World War II. And it was mainly a Midwestern franchise. And a number of Elkhart County residents played within that league. And since this was the 1940s, there is some excellent newsreel footage of the team that was used for promotional purposes, and I'm really hoping that it works this time.
That All-American pastime, baseball, brings out the All-American Girl Baseball League for spring training at Alexandria, Virginia. 2 teams are working out, the Fort Wayne Daisies and the Racine Bells, getting in shape for an opening day doubleheader. Dottie Schroeder is quite confident that her hair won't get in her eyes. And keeping her eye on the ball is catcher Kate Von Drove. Okay, gals, play ball. Pat Scott has quite a curve, but this one is wide, and Gene Marlowe is willing to wait. Gene bunts it, the squeeze is on. Tibby Eisen slides home with a run and a nicely bruised leg. Better a bruise than long pants, eh, gals? Joe Weaver hits the long ball, almost out of the ballpark. Boy, that clears the base paths. And inside the park homer by a whisker.
Yay, it worked. Okay, so if you've seen the film A League of Their Own, those scenes probably looked pretty familiar to you. The women playing baseball, those famous short skirts. But one thing we don't really get a sense of in that newsreel is who these women really were. What were they like as people? The answer to that is that they came from varied backgrounds. But there was one origin story that occurred fairly often among the league's players. And it went like this. There was a teenager who grew up on a farm in a rural Midwestern town. Her dad taught her to play baseball at a young age, and she played all the time with her neighborhood friends. Eventually, she made her high school team, which, by the way, would not have had as many resources as the boys' teams or played as many games. But one day, she gets an invitation to try out for a new professional girls' baseball team. Suddenly, her favorite childhood game has become something that puts her into the national spotlight and something that connects her to the entire country. That was the exact story for Goshen resident Shirley Salisbury, who played for the South Bend Blue Sox in 1953. There's Shirley there. So Shirley was 17 when she tried out for the Blue Sox. She actually had to get her parents' permission to go to tryouts, but she did make the team, and she earned $5 a day to play right field. When she made her debut, you can see here from this news clipping that the Blue Sox had a special Goshen night over at their ballpark in South Bend to encourage people from Goshen to come out and support their hometown girl. Now, according to Shirley's family, she remembered all of her teammates fondly. I have a few. She even kept scrapbooks of all of her teammates with lots of pictures from her baseball days. We have Cookie here. I like all those fun nicknames. Here's Buttons. And we have Wimpy here. Do any of you think you have a nickname that would work for a baseball team? Yeah, I've been trying to think of one for myself. I can't come up with one as good as Wimpy. So we think of these women today as pioneers. Despite the pressure on them to reinforce traditional gender norms, short skirts, anybody? They still were able to break down barriers. So Wimpy here, whose actual name was Mary Baumgartner, also called Elkhart County home for a while at least. She dedicated her life to advancing women and girls in sports. After her days playing for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, she went on to teach science and phys ed at Jimtown High School, and where she was also a coach for a lot of girls' sports. In addition, she was elected to the very first Women's Advisory Board for the Indiana High School Athletic Association. So clearly, she made it a point of her career to advance girls' and women's opportunities in athletics. Here's a quote from her that I think sums up her position very well. "Girls can do anything. Just turn them loose. That's all you got to say. They're intelligent, you know, and they don't take much guff from anybody anymore. They're raised different today, and it's a different world. Just think, I got to be part of it." You can really sense her joy and her gratitude in that sentiment. And that's one thing that united all of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League players. They loved the game. For Wimpy, it meant continuing the push for more girls and women in sports, and also relishing the freedom that she felt when she played. Here's one more quote from her that I really love. "I never talked about my whole life before, but the best part of it, one of the best parts, was playing ball. You can't beat playing ball and meeting the people that you meet and learning the geography of the country and just doing what you could do. It's a free country and you could just do anything. Nobody can stop you if you don't want them to." And for Shirley Salisbury, our Goshen girl, that meant that she continued to enjoy the game long after her time with the Blue Sox. Her family says that she was never without her bat, glove, and ball, and she would always play with her nephews at family gatherings. And Shirley remained proud of her involvement with the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. In 2021, she actually got to throw out the first pitch at a South Bend Cubs game and relive a bit of her glory days on the field. There's Shirley in 2021. Baseball in Elkhart County has taken many forms. Across generations, folks have played for factory teams, for city rec teams, and semi-pro teams, and even for nationally recognized professional teams. And within those teams, baseball has offered a path for people in Elkhart County to find community, power, and entertainment, while at the same time highlighting inequalities. That's evident particularly with Elkhart County's black teams and with the women who played for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. The through line with each team, though, is that people have found joy in playing and watching baseball for over a century here in Elkhart County. So my wish for you today is that as the baseball season progresses this year, you'll find your way to a seat in the stands or maybe even up to the plate. After all, baseball is a game that can be enjoyed by everyone. So thank you so much for having me today.